Yeah, I suppose it's time to enter the fray. I don't expect I'll spend very long here, but I thought it was worth making a video and editing it. So here's our first clip from April 3rd, 2020. This comes from U.S. Department of State, 321,000 subscribers. Assume you trust this video. This is
to help them. And today also the CDC is announcing additional steps Americans can take to defend against the transmission of the virus. From recent studies, we know that the transmission from individuals without symptoms is playing a more significant role in the spread of the virus than previously understood. So you don't seem to have symptoms and it still gets transferred. In light of these studies, the CDC is advising the use of non-medical cloth face covering as an additional voluntary public health measure. So it's voluntary. You don't have to do it. They suggest it for a period of time, but this is voluntary. I don't think I'm going to be doing it, but you have a lot of ways you can look at it as follows. The CDC is recommending that Americans wear a basic cloth or fabric mask. They can be either purchased online or simply made at home, probably material that you'd have at home. These face coverings can be easily washed or reused. I want to emphasize that the CDC is not recommending the use of medical grade or surgical grade masks, and we want that to be used for our great medical people that are working so hard and doing some job. Medical protective gear must be reserved for the frontline healthcare workers who are performing those vital services. The new mask guidelines also do not replace CDC's guidance on social distancing, including staying in your home when possible, standing at least 6 feet apart for a period of time. Again, we're going to all come back together here. We're going to all come back together and practicing hand hygiene, which we should do anyway. A lot of things I think are going to spill over. Shaking hands maybe will stay with our country for a long time beyond this. One of our great doctors was telling me that, as you know, we have flus every year, and the number of people killed by the flu is very substantial. It said that if they didn't shake hands, that number would be substantially lower. So maybe it'll stay. Maybe some of these things long term will be good. But those guidelines are still the best and the safest way to avoid the infection. So
I hope that you will not say that I cut that too short. I feel like I cut it a little bit too long, but whatever. So this is what I am specifically arguing against. Badger, a fairly well-known streamer who has been outspoken recently, says, "I've said exactly what Fauci said in this email about masks throughout COVID, and I've experienced so much resistance. Cloth masks do not protect you. Instead, they provide a false sense of security. Masks should be an indicator that you're symptomatic." And this is where I think he is quite wrong. But before I go into that, let's actually read Fauci email. First of all, look at this date here, Wednesday, 5th of February 2020. Until April 3rd, 2020, the CDC's guidance on masks was that people should not wear masks. And there's pretty good reasons why you don't want to give instructions for people to wear masks, especially in a pandemic where your decision is going to affect 300 million people, or who knows, it could affect the globe by making a decision before you have the evidence. So that's why they waited all the way to April 3rd. So this reflects the CDC guidance before April 3rd. Masks are really for infected people to prevent them from spreading infection to people who are not infected, rather than protecting uninfected people from acquiring infection. The typical mask you buy in a drugstore is not really effective in keeping out virus, which is small enough to pass through the material. It might, however, provide some slight benefit in keep out gross droplets if someone coughs or sneezes on you. I do not recommend wear a mask, particularly since you are going to a very low risk location. Your instincts are correct. Money is best spent on medical countermeasures such as diagnostics and vaccines. Safe travels, best regards, Tony. Remember that none of the lockdowns occurred until March, and back in February 2020, I was still going to work every day, and I went on public transit every day, and the only discussion of COVID back in February 2020 was that it was yet another disease, which, like SARS before it and MERS and swine flu, was going to spike and then go away, right? So this shows a very different world than, say, April 3rd. So the reason why he's getting resistance is because you wear a cloth mask to protect other people. Because COVID has a long incubation period where you are actually, I probably shouldn't even say the word incubation period, I should say it has a period of asymptomatic, but it's not a person that is asymptomatic throughout their entire infection. Those people are essentially not transmitters. The transmission of the disease occurs pre-symptomatic, and that was known very early on. It actually was part of the reason why everyone in the early time thought that it was such a small deal, because you had a couple deaths, right? What does a couple deaths mean? Well, it means that thousands and thousands of people were infected pre-symptomatic and were spreading the disease. Okay, so yeah, here's just the same thing by Wikipedia. CDCP, since 3rd April 2020, recommend that people wear a cloth face covering in public. That is to slow the spread. The reason why a person might decide to wear a mask, even if, say, they're vaccinated, even if, say, they are asymptomatic, is because you have a measure of doubt that you don't know whether the vaccine has been effective in you, since the vaccine has like a 90-something% effect. And if your risk tolerance is low enough, you might think, well, this is just a bad idea generally to walk around without a mask on, when wearing a mask has so little downside. Unfortunately, people like my father and anti-mask people have this aversion to masks, and that's unfortunate because the mask isn't going to harm you. A disease that is lethal, that is kind of a concern to me. If your risk tolerance is high enough, you could, if you wanted to, do anything you want. And that's okay. I mean, in my opinion, having a risk tolerance so high is weird. I can't, I guess because of my own paranoia, I cannot imagine a society that decided that the pandemic would be lengthened, that I assume we all agree is a bad thing, because people decide not to wear masks. And now that it's June 10th of 2021, the numbers are low enough that this is essentially a moot point. But so why did Badger decide that June 1st would be a good time to discuss masks? I suppose it's because of the Fauci emails hashtag, and that's not a good excuse. This, generally, the entire hashtag was dominated by people who deny reality, and I think that is what really drove me to make this video. That if you take into context that this email was 5th of February 2020, before any precautions were taken, and that April 3rd was when the CDC gave its guidance. Meaning this email has no sensible context. So my argument against this is that you should probably wear a mask if your risk tolerance is average, right? And that's what we saw. That's what we saw throughout the pandemic, that people decided to wear masks and businesses decided to require masks. And indeed, some people decided to tackle people that decided to not wear a mask, and I don't like the idea of violence to enforce common sense. But now that I think about it, right, when common sense is so straightforward, there seems to be only one possible explanation of a person resisting that common sense, and that is not that their risk tolerance is very high. In fact, most people's risk tolerance is pretty low. I would say that you would have to convince me that your risk tolerance is high by, say, a series of behaviors that was risky and generally against your own well-being. And instead, I think the answer is that people have decided that they would rather make it a topic of debate than to accept the truth of the matter. Do I have an end argument for this? Right, I guess there is, isn't there? It is unfortunate, but it's yep. Seems to me that trying to contain the virus as we are doing at present will be futile. Anthony Fauci's response: thank you for your note. And so his argument is they shut down gyms and restaurants for this. And so I am biased against this point of view just because I didn't go to gyms or restaurants before the pandemic. I've been cooking my own food for a long, long time, and that's, I guess that's, yeah, you just got to accept that. But they didn't shut down gyms and restaurants because it boggles my mind why you would look into the emails and see this one specifically, because the vaccine did change the R value. And then you have to type it in. So if you first look at cases, so yeah, lockdown, right? It's still in lockdown somewhat, and then this is when people started traveling for winter and lockdown, and then vaccines all throughout here. In fact, vaccination started around January, so you could actually say, yeah, vaccines did all that, and then that. Lockdowns, on the other hand, did, right? And if we look, the number of deaths went down dramatically, but that wasn't enough, was it? I suppose that's that is the concern that I have, is that people are weighing gyms and restaurants versus lengthening the pandemic and lots more people dying. I suppose my disappointment is evidence that I have a high standard for those people that I have high respect for, and unfortunately my respect is being diminished daily whenever I see something that is so lazy that a little bit of research could have convinced anyone, hopefully anyone, to not post that post. And I think Twitter is at fault for this idea of short tweets getting interaction provides people with a significant incentive to make bad arguments, and those bad arguments have to be short. You can absolutely link as much supporting evidence as you want, or make that make the replies as long as you want, but there is a limit to people's attention, which means that Twitter is part of this problem, and the only way that we're going to fix this problem is by taking a moment and making that decision whether or not to post.